Hey everyone, this is Aspie and you're watching The Incredible Aspie. And today, I'd like to talk about something which I interestingly saw on Twitter from one of my more progressive followers named Oreo. Essentially, this was a picture from Hunter Avallone's Instagram page, and apparently he made a post which is apparently very controversial to a lot of his followers. So I'd like to read it out, and forgive me if I stutter a lot. I have a lot of trouble speaking in sort of a fluid way, so forgive me if I have trouble. Hey guys, I know this may come as a surprise to a lot of you, but I feel it's my responsibility to be honest and open with my followers and fans. You may have noticed my opinions have been evolving lately. Perhaps the biggest shift in my opinions comes to the concept of sex and gender. I truly used to believe that gender is biological just like sex. I used to think people who claim gender is a social construct are complete retards. It's okay if you still believe that. It took me a long time to understand that sex and gender are very different, as recognized by most medical experts. Sex is biological, genitals, chromosomes, estrogen, etc. Gender is different. Gender is the social expectations we place on people based on their sexual characteristics. So we now believe that there is a sort of separation between sex and gender. Alright, we'll get to this later. This may be correlated with sex, but it is not intrinsic. I disagree with that to a degree, but I'll get to that later. Social expectations for gender have changed countless times throughout history. I agree with you just a little bit there. For example, while attending a funeral, men are expected to wear suits and women are expected to wear dresses. I think this is a very simplistic view of the issue at hand, but I'll talk about that later. There's nothing wrong with this, but there's no denying that we socially construct the concept that men wear suits and women wear dresses. Sure, but the idea that you can sort of attach this to behavioral differences, and anyway, I'll talk about that later. It hasn't always been this way, which is further proof that gender identity has changed over time. Gender identity is the long version of gender, reinforcing the idea that you are able to identify with a gender and not be born with it. Alright. Gender expression is based on how the individual expresses their gender identity. Gender is different from sex, and I arrived at the point that I could no longer refute the scientific evidence I saw in favor of this fact. I would be very interested to see what scientific evidence Hunter Avallone saw which caused him to change his opinion on sex and gender. The behavior between the two genders or sexes is, largely cultural, but there's also a strong biological component to it. And, if you look at studies which show, the differences and the sort of performance gaps, you could say, between the genders and sexes, you'll often find that the more egalitarian a society is, the wider those gaps become. And it shows that women oftentimes have different preferences to men. And this is largely based on biology. So, you sort of taking this new view of yours, the sort of leftist view that sex and gender are completely separate and that there is no biological component to the behavioral differences between men and women, I think is a very inaccurate and very misguided and unnuanced view of sex and gender. Obviously, men and women are more alike than they are different, but if you look at large aggregates, men and women do tend to have different behavioral patterns. I just cannot deny facts for the sake of my own feelings any longer. I know this may be upsetting to many of you, and I know this is probably shocking. It's okay if you're upset by this, but please know I am doing my best to continue being genuine and honest about my true beliefs. My social media accounts were created so that I could have a voice and share what I believe. If I can no longer do that out of fear of a backlash, my social media accounts have lost all purpose. Thank you for understanding. Alright, now, the summarizal that he basically said that his mainline view of that sex and gender are basically synonymous of one another has changed to the sort of leftist belief that sex and gender are two distinctly different things. That sex is the biological component of, the different sexes, and that gender is sort of the behavioral aspect of the two. And that the behavioral component component is influenced by culture and nothing else. I mean, he did say that those two are correlated, but I think he meant to say that culture completely controls gender identity and that it is not controlled by any biological component whatsoever, which I think is very inaccurate, as I said before. There are biological differences between men and women, and these differences do affect behavior. I mean, men have more testosterone, women have more estrogen, and the hormonal differences between men and women do affect behavior in a very profound way, and I don't think you could really deny that, Hunter. Now, I do respect Hunter Avallone for being honest with what he now believes. I mean, most people would not really have the sort of, testicles to do that. But at the same time, I should have seen this coming. People like this, especially when they're young, when they have these, very conservative beliefs, these, very sort of right-wing edgy beliefs. As they get older, they start to change and their brains start to develop more. There's this 14-year-old kid who was called the conservative wonderkin, and he eventually became a pot-smoking hippie from Berkeley, as Steven Crowder says. And young kids like this, they tend to change their beliefs a lot as time goes by. I was never a giant Hunter Avallone viewer. I mean, I found his content somewhat entertaining, but I never found it intellectually stimulating. He would just get on YouTube and he'd just start, going on and on about, fat acceptance, which is pretty much like the bottom of the barrel. It's like the lowest hanging fruit. In fact, I don't even think it's low hanging fruit. It's fruit that's been picked off the tree, cut up, processed, canned, and shipped to your front door free of charge. So he essentially just said, haha, look at this, stupid feminist, and he would just, turn off his... And, that would be his video. And I never found it really that entertaining. And, I kind of respected the fact that he was a Christian like me, but I should have known that would have changed a while ago. I mean, you can even go through this here. I don't know where it is, but I think he, called a guy stupid for being a Christian down later here. And, I've been talking about this with friends of mine. Apparently, the guy has become somewhat of a douchebag. He does seem to have become very narcissistic in a way. I mean, if you take a look through his YouTube, through his Instagram, I mean, look at this. Yeah, the picture with the babe, with his girl, with his fiance and the baby's cute, but you can just see, the pictures here, this, it just reeks of narcissism. Don't get me wrong, taking pictures with your loved ones is fine, but this just sort of really has a sort of tinge to it, which kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But as I said before, I still respect Hunter Avallone. I mean, it takes a level of courage to, get out there and say this. But I think I hit the wrong one. Yeah, that's the thing where I agree with him on this post. Yeah. But anyway, Hunter Avallone, I think his opinions have changed for the worst, of course. I remember a long time ago, one Twitter user said that he has a feeling that Hunter Avallone will one day turn into a liberal atheist, and I think he's starting to move in that direction. I mean, of course, I've heard studies that show that people's opinions don't really solidify until they're 25 or so. And my opinions might change slightly. I mean, I doubt they'll change by much because I'm 23 years old and I don't really have a lot more developing to do brain-wise, so he's a little bit younger than me. I don't know how much younger he is, but I should have known he was going to go through big changes like this. But as I say before, sex and gender, they're not completely separate. Go back to his post here. Sex and gender are not completely separate. Of course there is a cultural component to, how the different, sexes behave, but there's also a large biological component to it. I mean, the hormonal differences, the brain differences, there is so much difference between males and females that I find it very illogical just to write it all off as cultural differences. So, Hunter Avallone, I don't agree with you, but I'm willing to hear you out later and see how this goes. While I disagree with you, I still respect you as another commentator here on YouTube and wish you the best, I guess. Godspeed.